Russian leader Vladimir Putin made the biggest mistake of his life by invading Ukraine. Reactions against Putin's rule in Russia are growing every day. Soldiers in the Russian army have also started a revolt. Russia is experiencing the most chaotic period in its history. Experts say Russia is in grave danger. So how did the process turn out like this? How is Putin, who wanted to bring about the end of Ukraine, bringing about the end of Russia? What danger is Russia in? Let's answer these questions one by one. First of all, we need to rewind our calendars a little bit and take a look at the situation in Russia before the war started. Russia entered this war in a crisis. In February, just before Russia invaded Ukraine, inflation figures started to rise. Reactions against Putin in Russia were increasing day by day. It was thought that Putin had reached the end of his political career. Russia was failing in other countries too. Russia was the loser in the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. In Syria, the Assad regime, backed by Russia, was losing power. In Crimea, demands for freedom were rising again. Russia was losing in all regions. The Eastern Bloc, led by Russia, was allegedly in collapse. Putin wanted to show his own people and the whole world that he was still strong. In this way, he planned to regain popular support in Russia, but it was a very bad plan. Putin did not realize that this plan was a very bad plan because he was very confident in the strength of his army. He could not have predicted that the Ukrainian army would have such a great success. Putin's faulty plan was the beginning of the end. Mistakes followed one after another. The Russian army was completely unprepared for this war. Russian soldiers were suddenly sent to this war. But most of the soldiers did not want to fight. The Russian soldiers were terrified. Russian generals could not manage this fear. The Russian soldiers began to revolt. At the beginning of the war, these mutinies were small and individual, but as the war continued, the rebellion of the soldiers grew. Because the Russian army was not ready for a long war, the needs of the soldiers could not be met. First, the salaries of mercenaries started to be withheld. The soldiers who could not get their salaries in this war, where there were so many deaths, became very angry. Dozens of Russian soldiers said they would not fight anymore. Russian soldiers protested by burying their weapons in the ground. The speech of the soldiers who buried their weapons in the ground attracted great attention in Russia, because the speech of the Russian soldiers was very striking. In this video, Russian soldiers say the following: "This war is not our war, it is Putin's war. Putin started this war only to increase his own wealth and maintain his power. Too many soldiers are dying here, but none of our needs are being met. Our salaries are not paid, we cannot send men to our families. We are treated very badly here too." This speech by the Russian soldiers was also very important for the rebels in Russia. When this war started, anti-war protesters in Russia started to organize protest marches. But the Putin government tried to prevent these protests with violence. After the videos taken by Russian soldiers, anti-war protests started to gain traction again. Thousands of Russian citizens started a revolt in Red Square. The slogan of the revolt was very striking: "This is Putin's war, not ours." Indeed, this war was started only for Putin's purposes. Most of the Russian people did not support the war. With so many soldiers killed and the Russian economy damaged by the war, the number of opponents of the war began to grow rapidly. Russian citizens hear two news every day. One of is the death of their soldiers and the other is the price hike. The Russian people got fed up with this bad situation and increased the protests. At the same time, both civilians and military personnel in Russia staged demonstrations. The Russian commanders responded with severe retaliation of these protests. Because of this, the soldiers became even more irate. A Russian military base in Donetsk was responsible for the capture of the base's commander. The Russian armed forces were experiencing a major crisis at the time. As a direct result of these heightened tensions, an unexpected meeting was called in the Kremlin. As a direct consequence of this meeting, Putin committed a serious error in judgment. Putin fired a large number of Russian officers as a direct result of these disturbances. In the Russian armed forces, new recruits rose through the ranks relatively swiftly. An administration of inexperienced commanders took over leadership of the Russian army after the previous administration was removed from office. These leaders lacked experience, therefore they made a lot of poor choices. The situation in Russia was exploited to its full potential by the Ukrainian army. Attacks were launched on every base held by the Russian army that was experiencing difficulties, and as a result, troops withdrew from the front line. As a result, the Ukrainian army was successful in retaking a great deal of territory. Drones operated by the Ukrainian army provided constant surveillance of the Russian troops. About every single Russian base, dozens of reports have been written. The Ukrainian army has taken note of all the problems that have been occurring in Russian bases. In this regard, the work that was done by Ukrainian intelligence was very successful. Everyone throughout the world is keeping a careful eye on Ukraine's progress right now. Numerous military analysts are keeping a careful eye on the progress that Ukraine has made. It is already abundantly evident that the Ukrainian struggle will be remembered throughout the annals of world history. On the other hand, the Russian army is likely to be remembered throughout history as an unsuccessful army that was unable to put down the insurrection. Some knowledgeable individuals believe that this conflict will be remembered as the conflict that ultimately resulted in the disintegration of the Russian state. Because these uprisings in the Russian army are causing a great deal of trouble for the Russian government. The possibility that Russia will break up is growing more likely by the day. In Russia, there are a great number of different ethnic groups. The government of Russia is making an effort to integrate the country's ethnic minorities. The Russian commanders are especially cruel to the soldiers that come from the minority regions. Soldiers serving from the republics of Dagestan, Bashkortostan, and Chechnya face ongoing challenges. One of the most significant factors contributing to the unrest is the presence of ethnic tensions inside the ranks of the Russian armed forces. Soldiers hailing from Russia's many minority regions are deserting their country's armed forces. The decision to mobilize has also elicited a robust response from the people living in these locations. The calls for the freedom of Russia's religious and ethnic minority have picked up again. Because of this war, Russia might end up disintegrating into its constituent parts. The deterioration of Russia's economy might even bring about the country's financial collapse. Because of the embargoes that have been placed on it, Russia's economy is in a terrible state. In the following video, we will discuss the topic of the possible dissolution of Russia in great detail. But one thing is abundantly clear: the war has irrevocably altered Russia's course. The annals of human history are about to be rewritten. What are your thoughts on the mutinies that have been occurring in the Russian army? Do you believe that there will be an increase in the number of mutinies in the Russian army? Are these mutinies capable of altering the direction that the war is taking? What are your thoughts on the prospect that Russia could completely fall apart? We would love to hear your thoughts on this. Follow us for more updates.